He invited his broke ex-wife to his wedding. To mock her, she landed in a helicopter with Triplets, Season 2. The morning after the wedding disaster, the city woke up hungry for scandal. By sunrise, Ethan Carter's ruined wedding was already the story on everybody's lips. Phones buzzed, group chats exploded, quiet whispers became loud judgments. The wealthy Carter family, once known for polished appearances and controlled respectability, had become public entertainment overnight. A bride had walked away, a mother had collapsed, and 3 children had appeared like living truth in the middle of a lie nobody could hide anymore. Inside the Carter house, the silence was worse than noise. Vanessa Carter was upstairs, recovering, weak and humiliated. The flowers from the wedding still stood in corners of the estate, like ghosts of a future that had died before it began. Staff moved carefully. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Even the walls seemed embarrassed. Then the calls began. Business partners, investors, board members, men who once praised the Carter name now spoke in cautious tones, asking whether the family was stable enough to lead anything at all. Ethan stood in his father's old office, phone in hand, listening to one concerned voice after another. "We need reassurance, Ethan. This kind of publicity affects confidence. Can the company weather this?" He answered as steadily as he could, but the truth was plain. The scandal had not just broken a wedding, it had shaken the Carter name itself. And then, before noon, another car pulled into the long driveway. This time, it carried a man Ethan had not seen in far too long. Gerald Carter stepped out slowly, carrying the weight of years in his posture. He was Ethan's father, a dignified black man with a calm face, quiet authority, and the kind of sorrow that comes from understanding too late what should have been protected sooner. He had spent years overseas after separating from Vanessa, telling himself distance was peace, but peace had not repaired what absence helped damage. When Ethan saw him, he froze. "Dad?" Gerald looked at his son for a long moment. "I came as soon as I heard." There was no grand embrace, no dramatic reunion, just 2 men standing in the wreckage of a family history neither of them could pretend away. A little later, Gerald saw the children for the first time. Noah stood a little in front, protective by instinct. Micah stayed close to Nia's side, watchful and quiet. Eden looked at Gerald with gentle curiosity, her hand tucked into her mother's. The sight of them shook him more than any gossip ever could. These were not rumors, not consequences on paper. These were children, his blood, his grandchildren. His voice broke slightly when he said, "They're beautiful." Nia Monroe stood beside them with her usual grace, but her face remained guarded. She was polite because that was who she was, but politeness was not trust, not anymore. Later, Gerald pulled Ethan aside into the library, away from the noise, away from the damage, away from everyone else's eyes. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked straight at his son and spoke with painful honesty. "Your mother built walls and called them values. I walked away and called it peace." He paused, heavy with regret. "We both failed you. Don't fail them." The words hit Ethan harder than any public shame. He looked down, jaw tight, chest heavy, because for the first time, he saw the full truth. He had spent years blaming his mother's influence, the family pressure, the fear, the expectations. But now there were children watching him, children measuring whether he would stay or disappear again, and Ethan made a decision. He would not run. But deciding not to run and knowing how to stay were not the same thing. That truth became clear before the day was over. When he tried gently to speak with Noah, Micah, and Eden, they were polite but distant. When he spoke to Nia, she answered with calm restraint that cut deeper than anger. "You can see them," she said quietly, "but do not mistake access for repair." Ethan took the blow without complaint. He had earned it. Across the city, Malik Vaughn never asked for a report, never demanded updates, and never inserted himself for attention. He simply made sure Nia and the children had everything they needed. Groceries arrived, security stayed discreetly alert. Support came without fanfare. That was Malik's way. And by the end of that long, bruising morning, the contrast between the two men stood sharper than ever. One man was just beginning to understand what it meant to show up. The other had been showing up all along. A week after the wedding scandal shook the Carter family, life did something cruel and beautiful at the same time. It kept moving. Nia Monroe had no luxury of sitting still with her emotions. The children still had school. The orphanage still needed workers, supplies, and permits. Her community learning school still opened its doors every morning to elderly men and women who came with notebooks, trembling hands, and determined hearts. So while the city still whispered her name alongside Ethan's ruined wedding, Nia kept building. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived that made her hands shake for a completely different reason. It was official, stamped, urgent. Nia opened it at her office desk while sunlight poured across stacks of student files and project plans. As she read, her breath caught. Her adult learning school had been selected for a major national expansion grant. The program was being recognized as one of the most impactful community education models in the region. The funding was enough to launch 3 more branches. For a moment, she could not speak. This was bigger than money, bigger than recognition. This was proof that what she had built from brokenness mattered far beyond her own neighborhood. It meant more elders learning to read, more forgotten people finding dignity, more lives changed because one woman refused to let pain be the end of her story. When she told her staff, they screamed, cried, and hugged her so tightly she nearly laughed through tears. But the joy did not last, unchallenged. Attached to the grant letter was a condition. The program director, that was Nia, would need to relocate temporarily to the capital city for a 12-month oversight period to supervise the expansion launch. The room changed. A year. A year away from the life she had built with her own hands. A year away from the orphanage while it was still finding its feet. A year of uprooting Noah, Micah, and Eden, or else leaving them behind in a way she could not imagine. A year of disturbing the fragile balance that had only recently begun to settle. That night, the letter sat on the kitchen table while the children ate dinner and talked over each other. Noah wanted more chicken. Micah was explaining something serious about a class project. Eden was asking whether the capital city had better pancakes. Their innocence made the decision feel even heavier. Later, after they were asleep, Nia sat with the letter in her lap and let the fear settle in fully. That was when Ethan arrived for a scheduled visit. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Nia handed him the letter in silence. He read every page carefully. For a second, real pride lit his face. "This is huge," he said. "Nia, this is incredible." But then his expression tightened. "A year?" She nodded. Ethan sat back, thinking like a father now, not just a man with old regrets. "The children are only just beginning to feel stable. We are only just finding a rhythm with them. If you leave now, everything could shift again." His concern was real. Nia heard that. But beneath it, she also heard fear. Fear that the fragile bond forming between him and the children might weaken if distance entered the picture. The next day, she shared the news with Malik Vaughn. He listened without interrupting. He read the letter twice. He asked about the branches, the staffing, the impact, and what it would mean for the elders who still had no second chance anywhere else. Then he set the paper down and looked at her steadily. "This is what you were built for," he said. Nia blinked, her throat tightening. Malik continued softly. We will figure out the rest, the children, the logistics, the orphanage, all of it, but do not shrink yourself for anyone's comfort, not even mine. That landed deep. One man was speaking from fear of losing what had only just begun to grow. The other was speaking from faith in the woman he knew she was, and though Nia said nothing yet, she heard the difference with painful clarity. By the time she folded the letter again that night, her opportunity had become something else too. A test, not just of her calling, but of the men standing around it. A few days after the grant letter turned Nia Monroe's life upside down, another storm arrived without warning. Nia had barely slept. Her mind was still divided between the expansion opportunity, her children's stability, the orphanage, and the quiet pressure building around her from every direction. Through all of it, Malik Vaughn kept doing what he always did. He showed up. He checked on the school budget. He made calls about the orphanage permits. He arranged transportation for one of Nia's elderly students to get to class after surgery. He carried other people's burdens so naturally that nobody stopped to ask who was carrying his. That was the problem. The day it happened, Malik was at the headquarters of Vaughn Global, the company he had built into a business empire. He was in the middle of back-to-back meetings, reviewing contracts, answering calls, and refusing rest the way powerful men often do when they think endurance is strength. His assistant later said he looked pale that morning. Another executive said he rubbed his chest once and brushed it off. Then, in the middle of a conference briefing, Malik collapsed. The room erupted, chairs scraped back. Someone shouted his name. His staff rushed forward as documents scattered across the polished floor. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, word had already started moving through private circles. Nia got the call while she was reviewing expansion paperwork. For 1 second, she stopped breathing. "Hospital?" she whispered into the phone. "What do you mean, hospital?" By the time she arrived, she was already shaking. She moved through the emergency wing with fear in her eyes and prayer on her lips. A nurse asked her to wait. She could not. She stood anyway, sat, stood again. Her heart beat so hard it made her chest hurt. Then a doctor approached her quietly. "Are you family?" Nia hesitated. The question itself stung more than it should have. "I'm close to him." The doctor nodded with professional gentleness. "Mr. Vaughn is stable for now. But this is serious. He has been managing a heart condition for over 2 years." Nia stared at him. The hallway blurred around her. 2 years? She repeated faintly. The doctor continued carefully. Stress, overwork, and strain had worsened the condition. Malik had been under treatment, monitoring, restrictions, instructions he had clearly not been following well enough. Nia felt something deep inside her break open. He had carried all of that alone. He had helped raise her children, protected her peace, held up part of her life without asking for anything back. And all that time, he had been quietly fighting something this serious without telling her. When she was finally allowed into his room, the sight of him nearly undid her. Malik looked tired, weaker than she had ever seen him, but his eyes were calm the moment they found hers. Even now, he looked more concerned about her fear than his own body. "You should have told me," Nia said, her voice already trembling. He gave a faint, apologetic smile. "I know. No, Malik, you should have told me." Her tears were rising now. "How could you carry this by yourself?" He looked at her for a long moment, then answered with the same quiet honesty that had always defined him. "Because I never wanted you staying near me out of pity," he said softly. "I only ever wanted you close because you wanted to be." That was the moment Nia lost the last of her composure. She sat beside his bed, grabbed his hand, and cried openly, not the guarded tears of a woman trying to stay strong, not the silent tears she saved for empty rooms. These were broken tears, Deep tears. The kind that come when the heart realizes something it can no longer deny. Because sitting there beside Malik Vaughn, with hospital machines humming softly and fear still cold in her chest, Nia understood the truth at last. What she felt for him was not gratitude, it was not dependence, it was not comfort mistaken for affection. It was love, deep, steady, terrifying love. She did not say it aloud. Not yet. The moment was too raw, too fragile, too heavy with everything unsaid. But she stayed beside him for hours, long after visiting time ended, her fingers still wrapped around his hand, as if letting go would be a kind of betrayal. And across the city, when Gerald Carter quietly told Ethan what had happened, Ethan fell silent for a long time. Then he asked the question that revealed just how much he was beginning to understand. Was I ever that kind of man for her? Gerald looked at his son, saw the pain in the question, and said nothing. He did not need to. The silence answered for him. The week after Malik's collapse, the Carter house grew quieter than it had ever been. Not peaceful, not healed, just quiet in the way homes become quiet when pride has finally run out of strength. Vanessa Carter was no longer the commanding woman who once moved through rooms like she owned not just the house, but the emotions inside it. Since the wedding collapse, her body had weakened. Since the scandal, her spirit had dimmed. And now, as doctors came and went in low voices, another truth settled over the family, like cold rain. Vanessa's memory was beginning to fail her. The doctors called it early-stage cognitive decline, worsened by prolonged stress and emotional strain. Ethan heard the explanation standing stiffly beside Gerald, but the medical language barely touched what he was actually seeing. Some mornings, Vanessa still spoke with sharp clarity. Other times, she forgot what day it was. She misplaced names. She repeated questions. She stared at familiar objects as though they belonged to someone else's life. It was frightening. But what frightened Ethan most was not her confusion. It was her softness. One late afternoon, he walked past her sitting room and paused at the doorway. Vanessa was in her chair by the window, holding an old photograph with both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly against the frame. Ethan stepped closer and saw what she was looking at. It was a college photo. Young Ethan, young Nia, standing close together, smiling like the world had not yet found a way to break them. Vanessa looked at the photo for a long moment, and then spoke so softly, Ethan almost missed it. She was a good girl. He froze. Vanessa did not know he was standing there. I don't know why I couldn't just say that, she murmured. She was a good girl. Something in Ethan gave way at those words, because for the first time, he was not looking at the mother who controlled everything. He was looking at a fading woman sitting inside the ruins of her own choices, and standing there in that doorway, Ethan grieved more than the damage she caused. He grieved the mother she could have been, the tenderness she could have offered, the wisdom she could have chosen. He grieved the version of her they would never get back. A day later, in one of her clearer moments, Vanessa made a request that shocked everyone. She asked to see Nia alone. Ethan immediately resisted. No. Vanessa looked at him, tired but steady. Please. Gerald said nothing. He only watched his son with the kind of expression that reminded Ethan not every hard thing should be prevented. So Nia came. She entered the Carter house with quiet composure, dressed simply, carrying none of the fear she once carried through those same halls. Time had changed her. Pain had refined her. She greeted Gerald politely. She nodded at Ethan. Then she stepped into Vanessa's sitting room and closed the door behind her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Years of hurt sat between them. Then Vanessa lifted her eyes. They were weaker now, but for once there was no coldness in them. No performance, no superiority. I owe you more than words, she said slowly. but words are all I have left." Nia stood still, saying nothing. Vanessa's throat tightened. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what mattered. I thought I was protecting my son. I thought I was guarding the family, but I was guarding pride, image, fear. And I hurt you." A long silence followed. Nia did not rush in to comfort her. She did not pretend the pain had been small. She simply answered with the peace of a woman who had already done the hardest work inside herself. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said quietly. "Not for you. For me. I did not want to carry that poison forever." Vanessa closed her eyes. One tear slipped down her face, and in that quiet room, without applause, without witnesses, without any dramatic sign except truth itself, something old and ugly was finally buried. When Nia stepped out a few minutes later, Ethan searched her face for answers. She only gave him one small nod. That was enough, because some battles do not end with noise. Some end with two women sitting across from each other at last, laying down the weight neither of them should have carried so long. A few days after Nia walked out of the Carter house with one old wound finally buried, another test arrived through the person nobody expected would carry it first: Noah. Of the 3 children, Noah had always been the boldest. He loved hard, spoke fast, and carried his protectiveness like it was part of his bones. If he sensed unfairness, he pushed back. If he sensed disrespect, he did not stay quiet. That fire had once worried Nia. Now she was beginning to understand it came from love. The trouble started at school. The wedding scandal had faded from headlines, but not from people's mouths. Adults still talked carelessly where children could hear. And children, as they often do, repeated what they did not fully understand. That morning, during a classroom break, one boy made a cruel remark about Nia. He repeated gossip he had overheard at home, something ugly about Ethan's wedding, about Nia showing up with the children, about ruining people's lives. The words were childish in delivery, but sharp in meaning. Noah went still. Then he snapped back. He did not hurt the boy. He did not do anything dangerous. But he argued fiercely, his voice loud enough to stop the room cold. Chairs turned. A teacher rushed in. And within minutes, Noah was sitting in the principal's office with his jaw tight, his arms crossed, and his anger burning hotter than his tears. Nia was unreachable at the time. She was in a long meeting with the education board, discussing the expansion grant that still hung over her life, like a blessing wrapped inside a burden. So the school called the emergency contact, Ethan Carter. When Ethan arrived, Noah looked away at first. The principal, a careful woman named Mrs. Holloway, explained the situation with professional calm. She was an older black educator with stern glasses, measured patience, and the kind of presence that made children sit straighter without being afraid. She made it clear Noah's words had crossed a line, even if the hurt underneath them was understandable. Ethan listened without interrupting. He did not jump to defend Noah recklessly. He did not embarrass him either. Once the meeting ended, Ethan and Noah walked out to a bench near the front of the school. The afternoon sun hit the sidewalk in long, warm stripes. Children's voices floated in the distance, but on that bench, everything felt still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, "You were right to defend your mother." Noah looked up, surprised. "But," Ethan added, "how you protect someone matters as much as why you protect them." Noah's face tightened again. "So I was just supposed to let him talk about her like that?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but there's a difference between standing up for someone and losing control while doing it." Noah stared at the ground for a second. Then his voice came out smaller, but sharper. "How do you know that now, when you didn't know it before?" That question hit exactly where Noah meant it to. Ethan did not dodge it. He looked straight ahead and answered with the honesty he was learning to choose. more often now. Because I learned it the hard way, because there was a time your mother needed me to protect her, and I didn't. I failed her, and I have to live with that." Noah turned and studied his father's face carefully, like he was trying to decide whether this man in front of him was real or just good at sounding sorry. Then came the harder question. "Are you really trying to be better?" Noah asked, "or are you just trying to get Mom back?" Ethan let out a slow breath. "Both," he said. "But I'm learning that one of those is mine to fight for, and one of those is hers to decide." Noah said nothing after that. He looked away, then nodded once. It was small, so small another person might have missed it, but Ethan saw it for what it was. Not forgiveness, not trust, but the beginning of something real. And when Nia got the full story later that evening, she sat quietly for a long time after Noah finished talking, because for the first time, Ethan had stepped into fatherhood in a public place, under pressure, and handled it with wisdom instead of pride. It did not erase the past, but it mattered. It mattered very much. 2 weeks after Noah's trouble at school opened a small but meaningful door between father and son, another challenge arrived, this time dressed in elegance, perfume, and polished cruelty. By then, Malik Vaughn had returned to work carefully after his hospital scare. He was stronger, though Nia noticed he moved with more caution now. He took fewer pointless meetings. He rested when pressed, at least in front of her. But his world had not slowed down. It had simply become more watchful. And with that world came old people, old expectations, and old complications. That was how Serena Whitmore walked back into the story. Serena was a striking Black American woman with the kind of beauty that turned heads without effort, and the kind of confidence that came from being welcomed in every wealthy room she entered. She came from influence, spoke with perfect control, and carried herself like someone used to being chosen. Years earlier, before Nia returned to Malik's life, Serena and Malik had moved in the same elite circles. People had assumed they would eventually become something serious. Serena had once assumed that too. Now she was back. Officially, she returned as a potential strategic partner for one of Malik's business ventures. Unofficially, the truth was much simpler. She wanted to see whether the place beside him was truly gone. Nia met her at a fundraising gala tied to Malik's foundation. The room was full of wealth, quiet status, and carefully managed smiles. Community leaders, investors, education advocates, and business figures floated under warm chandeliers, while cameras flashed discreetly from the edges. Nia stood beside Malik with calm grace, speaking to donors about the orphanage and the adult learning school. She belonged there, whether old versions of her believed it or not. Then Serena approached. Malik introduced them politely, but Nia felt the shift immediately. Serena's smile was flawless, her voice was warm, her eyes were not. "It's so nice to finally meet you," Serena said. "I've heard a great deal." Nia smiled back. "I'm sure you have." For most of the evening, Serena stayed careful. Too careful. She watched. She measured. She laughed a little too softly at Malik's remarks. She placed familiarity into small moments the way some women lay traps with silk instead of rope. Then, near the end of the event, she found Nia alone near a quiet hallway outside the ballroom. "I hope you won't mind my honesty," Serena began, her tone sugar-smooth. Nia turned slowly. "That depends on what honesty costs." Serena gave a tiny smile. "Malik lives in a very particular world, demanding, visible, ruthless even. He needs someone who fits that world easily." Nia said nothing. Serena tilted her head, studying her. "You are remarkable, truly, but remarkable and suitable are not always the same thing." The word hit like a ghost from another life. Suitable. For one sharp second, Nia was back in Vanessa Carter's orbit, being silently weighed and quietly dismissed. Suitable, as if women were objects to be measured against a room instead of souls to be loved inside it. But Nia Monroe was not that broken young woman anymore. She stood straighter, and when she answered, her voice was calm enough to be dangerous. "The last woman who questioned my suitability lost," Nia said quietly. "I suggest you study that history carefully before continuing this conversation." Serena's face changed, not dramatically, just enough. The confidence slipped, the script failed. For the first time all evening, she had no polished reply ready. She murmured something thin about misunderstanding and stepped away, but the retreat was obvious. A few minutes later, Nia returned to the ballroom with her head high, her hands steady, and her dignity intact. Malik noticed the shift in her immediately. Later, once they were outside and away from the crowd, he asked, "What happened?" Nia told him plainly. No embellishment, no trembling, just truth. Malik listened in silence. Then he looked at her with an expression that was part admiration, part tenderness, part wonder. "You didn't need me to defend you," he said softly. Nia met his eyes. "No." Then, after a beat, she added, "But I liked knowing you would have." Something warm and unguarded passed between them then, because Serena had come to shake Nia. Instead, she had revealed something else entirely. Nia no longer needed rescuing to know her worth, and Malik, standing beside her under the night sky, understood that the woman he loved was not just healing. She was becoming unshakable. A month after Serena Whitmore failed to shake Nia Monroe, trouble came from a different direction. Cold, calculated, and dangerous, in a way that did not raise its voice until it was already inside the walls. By then, Ethan Carter had begun rebuilding small pieces of his life. Not all of them. Not enough to call it peace, but enough to matter. He was showing up for the children more consistently. He was answering hard questions without hiding. He was learning, slowly and painfully, that redemption was not a speech. It was repetition, presence, truth told over and over until people had a reason to believe it. That was when the Carter business was hit. It began with one flagged transaction, then a second, then 3 missing approvals tied to funds Ethan had supposedly signed off on. Internal auditors started asking questions. Board members started whispering. By the time Ethan was pulled into an emergency meeting, forged documents had already been circulated, money had already been redirected, and manipulated records were already pointing directly at him. The accusations spread fast, too fast, because Ethan's name was still soft in the public mind. The wedding scandal had already made him easy to doubt. People who had only just started speaking to him with respect again now stepped back. Investors hesitated. Old critics returned. News blurbs started surfacing online. Not front-page destruction yet, but enough to poison confidence. Inside the boardroom, Ethan sat across from men who had once praised his recovery arc and now looked at him as if they had expected this all along. One of them said flatly, "Given recent history, this is difficult not to see as a pattern." That line burned, not because it was fair, but because Ethan had once given the world enough reason to believe the worst of him. Outside that room, Gerald Carter watched his son come out with a face like stone. "What happened?" Gerald asked. Ethan exhaled once. "Somebody inside the company set this up, and they made sure it looked like me." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Do you know who?" "Not yet." But the worst part was not the board, not the money, not even the damage to the family name. The worst part was Noah. A day later, while out with Gerald for ice cream after school, Noah overheard part of a news report playing from a television near the counter. The anchor spoke in the clipped, dramatic tone adults use when they want uncertainty to sound like guilt. Noah did not understand every business detail, but he understood enough. Ethan's name, fraud, investigation, suspicion. He went quiet immediately. Too quiet. That silence followed him home. He ate dinner without his usual comments. He gave short answers. He ignored one of Ethan's evening calls, then another. By the second day, even Micah noticed. "Something's wrong with Noah," Micah whispered to Nia. Nia already knew. When Ethan came by that evening, he sensed it the moment he stepped inside. Noah was by the window, arms folded, pretending to read. Ethan looked at him for a long second, then said gently, "Can we talk?" Noah hesitated, but he followed him out to the back porch. The air was cool. Evening light stretched across the yard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan did something the old Ethan would never have done. He told the plain truth. "Someone lied about me," he said. "I did not do what they are saying." Noah stared down at the porch steps. Ethan continued, voice steady. "I can't promise how fast the truth comes out. I can't promise people will be fair while we wait. But I will not lie to you to protect my image. You deserve the truth, even when it's hard for me to say." Noah's face tightened. "So you didn't do it?" "No." "Then why do people think you did?" Ethan let out a slow breath. "Because when people have seen you fail before, it becomes easier for them to believe you failed again." That answer landed. Noah was quiet for a long time, long enough that Ethan thought he might walk away. Instead, Noah looked up and said in a smaller voice than usual, "Okay, then we'll wait for the truth together." The words broke something open. Inside the house, Gerald turned his face away toward the kitchen window so nobody would see his eyes, and Ethan, standing there on that porch with his son, placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, like a man holding on to something far more precious than reputation. Meanwhile, without telling anyone, Malik Vaughn had already moved. The moment he learned what was happening, he quietly retained a private legal team and forensic financial investigators to dig into the fraud properly. He did not do it for Ethan. He did it because the truth mattered, and because if the children's father was falsely destroyed, the children would suffer too. That was reason enough. When Nia found out what Malik had done, she looked at him for a long time. "You helped him," she said softly. Malik met her eyes. "I helped the truth, and I helped your children." That answer stayed with her, and as the investigation deepened and the real betrayer slowly began to surface, one thing became clear. Ethan was being tested again. But this time, he was not facing the storm alone. A week after the investigation began to turn in Ethan Carter's favor, the air around all three adults changed. The legal team Malik quietly funded had done its work well. The forged records were unraveling. The real betrayer was beginning to come into view, and with Ethan's name slowly being cleared, one excuse after another started falling away. No scandal was big enough now to hide the truth that had been building for months. Both men loved Nia Monroe. Both had proven it, but they had proven it in very different ways. Nia felt that pressure everywhere. In the silence after the children went to bed. In the way Ethan looked at her now, with no arrogance left. In the way Malik still gave without demanding. In the way her own heart refused to stay confused forever. That was when Ethan asked to see her alone. He came in the evening, after dropping the children back from a visit. There was no polished suit this time. No performance, no carefully shaped charm. He looked like a man who had finally grown tired of hiding behind regret. Nia invited him to sit on the back porch. The night was quiet. Crickets moved through the dark. Light from the kitchen spilled softly behind them. For a moment, Ethan only looked at his hands. Then he lifted his eyes to hers. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said. "I know that." Nia said nothing. She let him continue. "I'm not here to argue with the past. I'm not here to explain away what I did to you. because there is no explanation that makes it less cruel. His voice tightened. I loved you then. I love you now. I never really stopped, and if there is any part of you that still feels something for me, I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life making it right. Nia's eyes filled instantly, because the painful thing was this: she believed him. This was not the old Ethan, not the weak man who let fear speak for him, not the proud man who hid behind Vanessa's shadow. This was a humbled man, a father trying, a soul stripped of excuses. But belief was not the same thing as peace, and Nia knew the difference now. When Ethan left, he did not push for an answer. He only nodded once, as though he understood that forcing love was how he ruined it the first time. Later that same night, Malik Vaughn came by to say goodbye before leaving for a short business trip. He found Nia standing near the doorway, quiet in a way that told him everything he needed to know. Malik had always been a man who could read the truth without demanding it be spoken first. The conversation happened, he said gently. Nia looked at him. Yes. He nodded once. He did not ask what Ethan said. He did not defend himself. He did not make a case. He only stood there with that same steady presence that had carried her through more storms than she could count. Then he said the words that broke the last wall around her heart. Whatever you decide, choose from your heart, Malik said softly. Not from guilt, not from history, not from what you owe anyone, just your heart. Then he turned to leave. Malik. He stopped. Nia crossed the space between them, her breath uneven, her eyes full. For a second she simply looked at him, as if she was standing at the edge of a truth she had delayed too long. Then she spoke. My heart already decided, she whispered. It decided a long time ago. I just kept calling it gratitude because love felt too big to say. Malik went completely still. Nia, she nodded, tears rising now. You have been my peace since the beginning, even when I was too wounded to name it. Emotion flashed across his face so openly it almost undid her. Relief, love, awe, the kind of joy that comes after waiting without demanding. Are you sure? He asked, barely above a whisper. This time, Nia did not hesitate. Yes. And for the first time, what had lived between them in silence was finally spoken aloud. Not hinted, not hidden, not mistaken for anything smaller. Love. 3 weeks after Nia Monroe finally spoke the truth her heart had been carrying for so long, the day arrived that felt bigger than romance, bigger than scandal, bigger even than healing. The orphanage opened. From early morning, the whole community seemed to move toward that building, like people heading to witness answered prayer. The new home stood bright and welcoming, decorated with ribbons, flowers, and handmade signs from children in the neighborhood. Volunteers hurried back and forth with trays of food. Churchwomen adjusted tablecloths and straightened chairs. Elders from Nia's learning school arrived dressed in their best, some carrying little notebooks out of habit, as if education itself had become part of their identity now. It was not just a ceremony, it was proof that one woman had taken everything meant to break her and turned it into shelter for others. Nia stood near the entrance, greeting people one by one, her smile warm but trembling at the edges. She wore simple elegance, nothing loud, nothing performative, but there was something radiant about her that day. Not because her life had become easy, because it had become meaningful. Malik Vaughn stood nearby, recovered enough to be fully present, watching the scene with deep and quiet pride. He did not hover, he did not center himself, but anyone with eyes could see what Nia meant to him. Gerald Carter had come too, dignified as always, standing a little farther back, with the expression of a man watching Grace repair damage he once thought permanent. Even Ethan was there, not trying to reclaim space that did not belong to him, but honoring the day because he understood now what it represented. And then there were the children. Noah stood tall, trying hard to look composed, though pride kept rising into his face. Micah took everything in with his thoughtful silence, watching details the way he always did. Eden was the brightest light of all, moving from person to person with joyful energy, asking questions, waving at familiar faces, and making adults laugh without even trying. When the program began, the crowd gathered under a wide canopy near the entrance. A local pastor offered prayer. One of the elderly students from Nia's school gave a short testimony about learning to read for the first time in old age. Another woman, her voice shaking with gratitude, said Nia had taught her that shame was not a life sentence. By the time Nia was called up to speak, the air already felt heavy with emotion. She stood before the microphone and looked out at the faces in front of her, the elders, the volunteers, the families, the children, the supporters, the people who knew the whole story, and the people who only knew pieces of it. For a second, she could not begin. Her throat tightened, her eyes filled. Then, before she could speak, a small movement near the front caught everyone's attention. A little girl from the orphanage, new to the home and known for rarely speaking, walked slowly toward Nia. She was tiny, quiet, and careful in the way children become careful when life has not been gentle with them. In her hand was a folded piece of paper. The crowd went still. The child reached Nia, tugged gently at her hand, and held up the paper. Nia took it and unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing. In the center was a woman with a large heart drawn across her chest. Around her were children reaching toward her, smiling, standing close, safe. The lines were simple, uneven, childlike, but the message was clear enough to break the strongest person in the room. Nia looked down at the little girl, already trembling, and then the child whispered, in a voice so soft people leaned in just to hear it, "You made us feel like we belong." That was it. Nia broke, not from pain this time, not from rejection, not from grief, from completion. She dropped to her knees and pulled the girl gently into her arms, crying openly in front of everyone. The kind of crying that comes when purpose catches up with suffering and finally explains it. The kind of crying that says every dark road led here, every humiliation, every tear, every lonely prayer, all of it had not been wasted. Across the crowd, people wiped their eyes without shame. Gerald bowed his head. Ethan looked away for a second, just to steady himself. Malik did not look away at all, and the triplets watched their mother with expressions too full for children's faces. Pride, tenderness, and the dawning understanding that their mother had built something holy out of her broken pieces. When Nia finally stood again, the drawing still in her hand, the applause had not yet started. The whole crowd was waiting on her. She lifted the paper slightly, breathed through tears, and said just one sentence. "I built this from broken pieces, and look what broken pieces can become." The applause came like a wave after that, and nobody standing there remained untouched by it. 3 months after the orphanage opening turned a crowd to tears, the season arrived at its final promise. Nia Monroe was getting married, but this wedding was nothing like the one that had once collapsed under the weight of lies. This one did not smell like performance. It did not feel like pressure. It was not built to impress a city. It was built to honor a covenant, quietly, faithfully, truthfully. The ceremony took place on a golden Saturday morning beneath soft sunlight and open skies, with the community gathered not as spectators, but as witnesses to a love that had been tested by time, heartbreak, sacrifice, and grace. White flowers lined a simple aisle. Music floated gently through the air. Church mothers dabbed their eyes before the vows had even begun. Elders from Nia's learning school sat proudly in the front rows, dressed in bright colors, and carrying the joy of people who had seen her build beauty from ashes. And at the center of it all stood Malik Vaughan. He looked steady, solemn, and deeply moved, like a man who had waited a long time without ever demanding the reward of his patience. His suit was elegant, his posture calm, but his eyes gave him away. The moment meant everything to him. Then Nia appeared. A hush swept through the gathering. She was radiant, but not in a loud way. She looked like peace made visible, like a woman who had survived being overlooked, humiliated, and broken, only to become the very person through whom others were healed. There was no fear in her face now, no uncertainty, only quiet certainty and the softness of answered prayer. At her side was Noah. He walked his mother down the aisle with his chin lifted and his shoulders squared, proud in a way that made several people cry all over again. Micah came just behind them, carrying the rings with careful seriousness, holding the small box as if he understood exactly how much it represented. And little Eden walked ahead, scattering flower petals with bright joy, smiling so hard that even the most composed guests had to laugh through their tears. Gerald Carter sat near the front, one hand pressed to his mouth, overwhelmed by the healing he had lived long enough to witness. Vanessa Carter, now frail and humbled by time, sat quietly with a handkerchief in her lap. The sharp pride that once ruled her had long since drained away. What remained in her face that morning was grief, tenderness, and the painful knowledge of what she had once almost destroyed. And Ethan Carter was there too. He sat farther back, not hidden, but not reaching for attention. He came not as a villain, and not as a man pretending not to hurt. He came as a father who had learned the difference between love claimed and love earned. He watched Nia walk toward Malik, and though sorrow moved through him, something else moved there too. Relief, respect, gratitude that the woman he once failed was now standing in sunlight, whole and deeply loved. When Nia reached the altar, Malik took her hands and held them as if he understood the full journey of everything those hands had built. The officiant began, but before the formal vows, Malik leaned in slightly and whispered something meant only for her. Nia's eyes filled instantly. Later, when people would ask what he said, she would only smile and answer softly. He told me he had been waiting for this since the day I helped him in that university hallway. He said every year between then and now was just the road leading him here. Then came the vows. Malik promised faithfulness, patience, and peace. Nia promised honesty, partnership, and a love rooted not in fantasy, but in tested truth. Their words were simple, direct, full of weight, the kind of vows that come from people who understand what it costs to stay. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the joy that rose around them felt almost too big for one morning. Malik kissed his bride. Noah let out the loudest cheer in the whole gathering. Micah exhaled like someone who had been holding his breath for years, and Eden threw the last of her petals into the air above their heads and laughed with pure delight as they floated down like blessing after blessing. That evening, at the long reception table, surrounded by food, music, elders, children, friends, and every life touched by their story, Nia looked around slowly, at her children, safe and thriving, at Malik, steady beside her, at Ethan, present in dignity as their father, at the school, the orphanage, the community, the life she now lived. Then she closed her eyes for one brief moment, not to escape, not to pray for more, just to feel peace fully. And the final lesson settled over everything like soft light. What was rejected became the miracle. What was broken became the foundation. What was planted in pain was harvested in joy. And the woman they once said was not suitable enough became the woman who built a life more beautiful than any of them imagined. That is what love finally builds when it is patient enough to wait for the right season. Before this story ends, let the lesson stay with you. The first lesson is simple but powerful. Never reduce a human being to one painful chapter of their life. Nia was rejected, insulted, and treated like she was not enough. But in the end, she became the very heart of healing for so many people. That means your pain is not your final identity, your rejection is not your final name, and your broken season is not the end of your story. The second lesson is about love. Real love is not loud talk. Real love is not pride. Real love is not possession. Real love shows up. Real love stays. Real love protects. Malik proved that love is patient, steady, and sacrificial. Ethan's journey also taught us something important. A person can fail badly, but true repentance must come with action, humility, and consistency. Words alone are never enough. The third lesson is about forgiveness. Forgiveness does not always mean forgetting. It does not always mean going back. Sometimes forgiveness means releasing bitterness so your own heart can breathe again. Nia forgave, but she also grew. She healed. She chose peace. Now let me share my honest opinion as a creator. This story is really about what can be rebuilt when people stop worshipping image and start choosing truth. For me, the most beautiful part was not even the wedding at the end. It was watching a woman take pain, shame, and rejection and turn them into shelter, education, family, and purpose. That is powerful. That is unforgettable. Now I want to hear from you. What touched you the most in this story? Did Nia make the right choice? Who do you think changed the most? Ethan, Vanessa, or Noah? Share your thoughts in the comments section. This is Mr. Hope, and I will see you in another story.